Okay, today we're going to be talking about tempo, more importantly, the application of tempo when you're using movements, whether you're following process programming or you're writing your own programs or you've been given a program by a coach. We're going to be talking about 3 different types of tempo today, specifically within one movement. That movement, we're going to do 3 sets of 10 of a dumbbell RDL, and we're going to look at 3 different potential tempos that you can use for that. So quickly, before we go into those 3 different tempos, we're going to talk about how to read tempo very quickly. We do have other videos on that. So first number is always going to be the eccentric or the way down. The second number is always going to be the bottom of the movement, whether you're pausing or not. The third number or letter is going to be the movement on the way up, or the concentric. And the fourth number is going to be at the top of the movement. Now, obviously, that makes it a little bit more difficult to read depending on the movement that you're doing, but we're going to apply this to a dumbbell RDL. So, option number 1, 3-1-1-0. So that's going to be the tempo for the first one. So that would mean 3 seconds on the way down, so a 3-second eccentric, a 1-second pause at the bottom, a 1 second to stand up, and then no pause at the top, so you're going straight back down into the movement. Now we'll talk about application of how you would apply that, or the intention behind that type of tempo, but essentially we're pausing in the hardest position, which is the lengthened position when your hamstrings, your glutes and your lower back are in that lengthened position of the RDL. There's no pause at the top of the movement, like I said, so you're essentially moving straight back down into that eccentric portion of the lift again. Option number 2, 3-0-1-0. So you still have 3 seconds on the way down, a 3-second eccentric. You have no pause at the bottom, 1 second to stand up, and then you have no pause at the top, same as you did with option number 1, where you're going straight back down into that eccentric. Now, option number 3 is 3-0-1-1. 3 seconds on the way down, same again, no pause in the bottom, and a pause at the top of the movement. So after you've taken that 1 second to stand back up, you're pausing for 1 second before you're then going back down into the eccentric portion again. Now, what happens over these 3 different options? Option number 1, moving to number 3, your intensity is increasing over the course of those sets, or the intensity can increase over the course of those 3 sets, and the density is actually decreasing over the course of those sets. And we'll talk about the application of that in just a second. So in the application, if we talk about option number 1, why would you want to do 3-1-1-0? Now, firstly, you'd want to maybe do this for an athlete that was beginning, that needs a bit of positional awareness to understand the lengthened position, how they can maintain the brace or maintain core control at the bottom of the lift where you're in the lengthened position and where it is hardest. That would be positional awareness, one potential reason why. Another reason, maintaining significant time under tension for hypertrophy training, for trying to elicit muscle growth. So with those 3 seconds on the way down, obviously in the eccentric portion, that's hard for you to maintain those 3 seconds. You're then having that 1 second where you're continuing to maintain tension at the hardest portion of the lift. 1 second to stand up, and then when you're coming back down, you don't have any pause at the top, so you can't catch your breath. You're continuing to maintain that tension on the hamstrings, the glutes and the lower back as you move straight back down. Option number 3, another option for this would be to use as a deload. Now, this wouldn't necessarily be deloading from an RDL, but say for example you were deloading from a deadlift, you decided to use a dumbbell RDL instead. What this would mean is, because we're essentially moving continually and maintaining a lot of time under tension, we wouldn't be able to use a lot of weight. It means that central nervous system can recover. So the option 1 would be a good option to use if you wanted to do a deload. Now, we are working essentially for 40 seconds continuously. So like I was talking about earlier in terms of density, number 1, we have a high amount of density. So we're doing a lot of work within those 10 reps, as opposed to these, which we'll talk about in just a second. Option number 2, so 3-0-1-0, we've now taken out that pause at the bottom of the movement. So essentially, we can still use that for hypertrophy, so we're building muscle, or we can just progress from option number 1. Now, why that is good is essentially as you're trying to progressively overload through a program, you might want to think about how you can advance one movement, keeping the rep scheme the same. You can just change the tempo. So by taking out the pause in the bottom, it allows that athlete to then come back up. A little bit less in terms of density means that they can increase the weight, and we're therefore increasing the intensity as opposed to the density. And then option number 3, Again, progression from number 2. What we do by taking out the pause in the bottom and putting in a pause at the top, it means that the athlete can take a breath, pause before they go back down to the eccentric lift. So what that then means is you're allowed to lift even more weight than what you were doing for option number 2. Progressing from option number 2, or essentially what that means is, like I was saying, in terms of intensity, we can kind of move away from hypertrophy and we're starting to build more in terms of strength by just using more weight, creating more of a stimulus that's going to tax our central nervous system, as opposed to us keeping the central nervous system taxing relatively low and building as much density as we can. So 40 seconds of work continuously for option number 1, 30 seconds of work continuously for option number 2, and 30 seconds of intermittent work because you're pausing at the top. Now, each of these tempos you can use in whatever setting you want, and obviously it depends on the intention you want, but hopefully that clears up a couple of potential options in terms of 3 different tempos you can use.